Hey, my name is Victor. I just bought the Lovells suspension kit and I'm going to be fitting it, well, I have already fitted one side to my camper trailer. The reason why I'm doing this video, I'm not a professional mechanic, but the Lovells guys were super helpful in explaining how to do it, and I thought I'd return the favour to the community just by doing a quick video which will hopefully help people like myself that didn't know how to do it in the first place and kind of needed help. So I bought the suspension kit. What I've got here is I got a new shock, new springs, so new shocks, new springs, and it comes with a neat little mud flap, which is quite cool. Also a new retention chain and new bolts for mounting the shocks. So the reason why these need to be done is this is the original shock that came in it. So this trailer is about 5 years old. I've heard that actually they can go a bit earlier, but look, I can compress this in between my hands and it doesn't rebound. So this shouldn't happen. I can compress it all the way. I mean, it's practically empty probably. It's probably got next to no oil or no oil in there. So this is like, we've been driving on just springs for quite a while. So I'll take us through. I've already done one side. I'll do the other side and I'll show you guys how to do that. Okay, the first thing we need to do is we need to jack the trailer up. Now before we do that, I've got a bit of safety gear here. Jack stands, absolutely critical. We don't support the trailer up with just the jack. So what I've done here, the trailer is obviously quite high. The axle stands don't reach that high, so I've got these pavers to lift the axle stand up high enough so it can support the weight of the trailer when it's all at the right height as well. So I've got an axle stand at the front as well. Also up on pavers, that's really important. What I've done is I've also taken the handbrake off on the other side. I've got to remove the chock on this side and move it to the other side, but I'll chock the wheels with the handbrake off. It just means this handbrake cable that's here, this green cable, is nice and loose, so that I can put the jack stand on the chassis rail. So yeah, on the chassis rails, jack stands, and then we come around the back here. What I'm using here, I'd love to use a trolley jack, but I don't have one. So you'll see the bottle jack that I've got, it's currently positioned under the swing arm. So we'll be using that to jack it up. Okay, we need to loosen the wheel nuts before we jack it up. Get to use my new impact wrench, which I'm super excited about. Okay, we're nice and loose now. We'll go jack it up at the back. Okay, so I've jacked up the wheel. You can see how far I've got off the ground. I just want to get those axle stands as high as I can. So that's as high as I go. Take the handbrake cable out of the way. Come around to the back. Make sure the axle stand's in good position. I've already raised this one up. And now we lower the jack down onto it. So do it nice and slow. Onto the axle stands, checking the axle stands still in the right place as I go down. Wheel needs to come off now, it's off the ground. Okay, so we've got the wheel off, we've got the swing arm here. So just to explain, this A-frame thing is the swing arm. So as the suspension goes up and down, the swing arm pivots off these bolts here and goes up and down, and the shock absorbs the impact and the spring holds the weight of the trailer. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take off this retention belt. So Lovells give you a new retention chain to put on here, but we're going to need to remove this one. And the reason why this belt is here is that so that swing arm, in any event, let's say the wheel falls off or anything like that, the swing arm can't extend far enough down that the spring pops out. So we're going to take this off so we can get the spring off. So to take the retention strap off, it's 19 mil. So you've got a 19 mil nut and a 19 mil bolt. So I've got a 19 mil spanner, and I've got the 19 mil socket on the impact wrench. So I'm going to take this off now. Now I used an impact wrench there, but you can use a ratchet and socket. Okay, now that we've removed the retention strap, we're going to take the bottom bolt off the shock so we can get the shocks out. These are 24mm bolt with a 24mm nut. So I don't have a 24mm spanner, which would be great if I did, but I don't. So I'm going to use a shifter, and then I'm also going to use a 24mm socket on a breaker bar, just so I can get a bit more leverage because I got small wimpy arms. Okay, once that's loosened off, I can use the ratchet, but I'll just do the other side, break the other side off first. Okay, now that I've loosened off the nut a little bit with the breaker bar, I'm going to use a ratchet and a 24mm socket and just undo it like this. Okay, now that I've done the bottom and the shock is hanging loose, we're going to do the top one. So starting with the breaker bar to break the tension on these nuts. Okay, now the other one, start with the breaker bar and then with the ratchet. Cool. Okay, now that we've taken the shocks off, we're going to lower the jack down. So the spring is no longer, the suspension is now free to swing all the way down, and the spring comes down. So this part where the jack is, we want to lower that down so the spring is no longer captive. Now we want to do that slowly because there's quite a bit of tension on the spring. I don't want that flicking out. So I'm going to lower the jack slowly. Okay, so I've got the swing arm on the ground. The bottle jack was quite imbalanced, so I ended up putting the spring arm on the ground here. So as it came down, the spring just sits in here. I've already pulled it out, but it comes out from the top and you can just pull it straight out. Mine's caked in mud, so you can see in here there's heaps of dirt and mud from my last trip. So I'm just going to clean all this out now. Okay, so I've cleaned out the seat in here. So in here was just a lot of mud and dirt. So wiped it out, dusted it out, just a quick clean just to get rid of some of the grit. Then on the bottom of the spring that you would have removed, you'll find a rubber seat. And there's a little notch here that lines up with the end of the spring here. So what we do is we put that on the bottom of the new spring and we chuck it in here. But now it's just going to sit loose because we're not high enough right now. So what I need to do now is I need to bring the arm into position so that the spring is pretty much ready to go onto the top. All right, we're going to put the swing arm back on the jack here, and at the same time I'm going to put the spring on here, because if I put it back up on the jack, there's not enough room to push the spring back into the top seat here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the spring in here, seat it, and then I've put the jack in the right position already, and I can just push it forward slightly to take the weight of this arm. So it's not super heavy. Well, it is heavy, but it's not so heavy you can't do this. Making sure that the jack is in a really good spot and you've got no limbs under anything that might fall. So now we've got the spring in place, we've got the jack in place, and we can jack it back up. Right, so the spring's in place. Now we're going to jack it up. So I've got the jack ready to go. We're going to bring it up. As I bring it up, I want to make sure that this spring is lining up with the rubber seat up the top there. So I'll bring it up a little bit at a time. Just adjusting as I go. Hard to one hand do this. So you've kind of got a donut sort of shaped seat here. So what I found is as you bring the spring up, it can pull on the inside circle or on the inside ring and fold it back. So you're just going to make sure that it's not doing that. So now we're sitting in the right spot, I think, and keep bringing it up. Looking good. All right, as I was jacking up and putting the spring in place, you'll see here, come down, come closer to the ground, all the way down, all the way over there, look at that. You'll see that the jack started tipping. So at that point, you've got to check it, and I didn't want to keep going here, obviously, because if I keep jacking, that thing's going to flick out and the spring's going to fly out. So what I've done is if you come over here, I'm going to take the weight off with a second jack so I can readjust that first jack so it's nice and straight. So I'm just doing it on the the horizontal. See how the jack's just popped out on the other one? Now we've got this jack taking the tension. Now we've got the other jack taking the weight. So I'm going to put this jack back in position so it's nice and steady. Rotate this point here so I can get at it with the jack handle. Now with the jack back under the bottom of the swing arm, the spring's in place. Now I haven't compressed the spring all that much yet because we still need to put in the shocks. So the next thing to do is to mount the shocks. Now one thing the instructions from Lovells recommends is as you put the shock back in, you put a little bit of grease in that bush up the top, just makes it a bit easier for the bolts to go in. The other thing you'll need to do is you'll need to bring that dust boot about 70 millimeters down and then attach a zip tie. So the kit actually comes with it. The instructions show you how to do it. It's pretty easy. So I'm going to put a bit of grease in here, just a bit of bushing grease that I've got, and mount it up. Get the bolt in there. Now the bolt is on the outside. So bolt goes on the outside and the nut on the inside on both of them. First one through. Just wipe some of that dirt off. Put the washer on. And then... Oh, that one went in way easier. Washer goes on the nut side. And I'm going to make a bit of room for that nut to come through. Right, now we need to mount the bottom of the shock onto the swing arm. So this bottom of the shock needs to come up and line up with the holes on the swing arm. You'll see that, you may see or may not be able to see that it's slightly off. So what we need to do, all we need to do is we need to jack up and down. So you're going to have to go up and down a little bit just to adjust it into the right spot so that the holes line up. So I'm just holding the shock in place. I'm turning the bottle jack with the other hand and I'm watching the holes until they line up. That looks about good. So bolt on the outside, right through, perfect. And the other one. With the other one lined up, the second one should go just straight in. Give it a jiggle, beautiful. Put the nut on with the washer first. Nut. Now it's a nylock nut, so make sure you've got the blue part on the outside. It won't go on the other way anyway. It'll stop pretty quickly. And we're good. Shocks are in. Now we need to tighten it up.
Yeah.
Right, now we've got the shocks in, we're going to put the retention chain in. So first thing we need to do is we need to put the bolts back in place. So unlike the strap, you can have these bolts done up first before you put the chain on. So we put the spacer in here. So this tube is to stop these from crushing in when you tighten up the bolt. So you just put it in place first, line it up, put the bolt in, and it goes through the middle, all the way through. All right, we'll do the bottom one. I've already put the tube in place, put the bolt through, washer, and then nut. All right, we're putting the bolts are in. So the retention chain comes with the D-shackle. So you put the D-shackle over the top, put the pin through, screw it up by hand. You don't need to get it super tight. I mean, you get it tight, but hand tight. That's the top one. Now notice that the bottom one doesn't reach yet. So what we need to do is jack up the swing arm a little bit to get the chain on. So it's jacked up now. Put the bottom pin in. All right, now we've got the shocks in, we've got spring in, we've got the retention chain in. Just double check everything's tight. So now the suspension is all put back together. But now we move on to the exciting part. We put the mud flap on.
My favourite part.
Yep. So the mud flap is just 3 screws and these little nuts make sure not to lose this little spring washers that come out. New one goes on. There we go, got a hole through now. Mud flaps on, looking good. Now we need to jack it up and just put the wheel back on. Last thing to do, check the axle stands out and the set of blocks. And there we are. Suspension installed on both sides with the mud flaps. Hopefully that wasn't too hard to follow. And I want to thank my assistant, that's Geneva. She's 5 years old. She was the one holding the camera, so nice job.